And hello again, ladies and gentlemen. And now, I just discussed Barbie, the movie I wasn't a huge fan of, but then again, I wasn't really a target demographic anyway. But now I have a movie I loved, and that's Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is a story of a real person who existed, and that's like the scientist Oppenheimer, and he's the father of the atomic bomb. He created the atomic bomb, and I actually never really heard about him before I heard about this movie. And that was really interesting stuff I learned. Yeah, it's strange I didn't know because I'm a history buff and I love history, but for some reason I never really heard about Oppenheimer before. But when I heard this movie was announced, I got very interested because I was always a huge Christopher Nolan fan. So of course, when a new movie by Nolan was announced, I was really excited. My favorite movies by Christopher Nolan are still the Dark Knight trilogy, all three of them, and Interstellar. Those are my still by far favorite Christopher Nolan movies. But I also love Inception, and I thought Tenet was very underrated because I loved it personally. Insomnia is pretty good, although generic. And then The Prestige, that's the one I'm a little bit iffy on. On one hand, really cool concept, but a twist kind of is the very thing that raised more questions than it answered, but that's a story for another time. So I was very much looking forward to Oppenheimer, especially that story of a father of atomic bomb was always very, very interesting once I heard about it. And I was really interested to what type of take Nolan would take on this movie. And I have to say, he did an amazing job. It's not one of my favorite Christopher Nolan movies. I think it's somewhere in between, like nowhere near as good as Dark Knight trilogy or Interstellar. Maybe not as good as Inception, but better than Tenet, The Prestige, Dunkirk. I put it somewhere in the middle. Yeah. That said, the middle ground for Nolan is still amazing because Christopher Nolan is like not only one of my favorite modern directors, he's literally one of my favorite directors in the history of cinema. I just love Christopher Nolan. And with this movie, like first hour or so, I say it takes a little bit of its time and it is a little slow. But then once it gets interesting and they start talking about the creation of the atomic bomb, that's when you're constantly on the edge of your seat and you cannot just stop watching and you're so glued into the screen. Because I'm a type of guy that in some conversation movies I can get bored, but not here. Here, almost every single conversation I was just like invested through and through. I really enjoyed to see what was going on through Oppenheimer's mind and what he had in mind while creating the atomic bomb and how they were discussing the physics of it, the potentiality of it. That was all so interesting, especially that you know now how, in retrospect, this all turned out. And they were also discussing the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I love that they didn't go on a black and white route, and instead you have Oppenheimer who thinks the bomb will kill lots and lots of innocent civilians, but then you have American generals and President Harry Truman who believe that throwing an atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is necessary to end World War II. And this is the subject that's still very much discussed among historians, and I'm really glad the movie didn't really go on a black and white route. At least I didn't get an impression that it did. And seeing all those conversations though was so interesting. The philosophical questions that the movie asks are so interesting and so make you think like was bombing Japan right? Should one man be blamed for the creation of an atomic bomb? Or who was responsible for overall of it? Oppenheimer or President Harry Truman? As well as did the nuking of Japan start the Cold War? Those are all very interesting questions, and the movie doesn't really provide you with definite answers. And in some ways, you probably have to accept that there might not be definite answers to such complicated questions. And this is all really interesting. And I probably might have to go and see the movie at least like 2 more times because this is very much a type of movie that requires more than one showing because it's very complex philosophical movie that really doesn't have definite answers, and to really fully grasp the whole thing, it definitely requires more than one viewing. So who knows, maybe I will even do an extended review of the movie, because as I said, this is really the type of movie that you probably feel like you need to watch at least 2 more times to really understand everything. And of course, the performances are great. Like, what great movie is complete without amazing performances? And Killian Murphy is fantastic as Oppenheimer, and the various emotions he does on his face, this is just incredible. And even though it's Killian Murphy, who has very recognizable face, and anytime I see Killian Murphy, I always think of, oh look, it's Scarecrow from The Dark Knight, or specifically from Batman Begins, but not here. Like, even though it was very clearly Killian Murphy, like, sometimes I even forgot I saw Killian Murphy, like, because his performance as Oppenheimer was so amazing, and like, when I would see his face, I would not even think Killian Murphy, I literally thought Oppenheimer. Yup, this really takes a huge talent to perform so well, and it also shows how greatly Christopher Nolan is able to get that great acting out of his actors. And also Matt Damon is also amazing as General Leslie Groves. General Leslie Groves was the army officer in charge of the Manhattan Project. And of course, as everyone was saying, the explosion at the Manhattan Project was portrayed on screen like we were all hyped it was going to be, and it did not disappoint. It was fantastically done. And the amazing thing is, like everyone is saying, it was very much practical effects. It was absolutely not CGI, but practical effects. And that's another reason I love Nolan for, because I agree, screw CGI. Practical effects all the way. And the explosion at Manhattan was very much practical. And also, and it was so amazingly done and executed. Like, this was sort of my most anticipated scene in this movie. I was very much anticipating, and it did not disappoint one bit. And overall, because before the movie I was reading a little bit about history to see what I was ready for, and even then I feel like I know now a lot more than I knew before the movie. Yeah, so this movie not only has an amazing story and all, but it's also pretty educational too. And finally, I will compliment one last thing in this movie, and that's the cinematography, because the landscapes and visuals in this movie are amazing and very much Nolan. When you watch this movie and see all the cinematography, you totally see that it's obviously Christopher Nolan, because even though it's a biographical historical movie, it's very much obviously a Nolan movie. Yeah. Overall, I say Oppenheimer is brilliant. It's not necessarily the best Christopher Nolan movie, but even the worst Christopher Nolan movies are amazing. So, by Oppenheimer being like in the mid-tier, it still means fantastic, brilliant movie. And I might have to see it a few more times and tell you a little bit more, because I think that there are still many things I've missed from the movie. But that's a good thing. Overall, I loved Oppenheimer. Very educational movie, and I learned so much from it. And press the like button, please subscribe to this channel. What did you think of Oppenheimer? And talk to you later, bye!